One thing I've been realizing as I make more and more videos is how useful it would be to actually have a player evaluation video so people know exactly what I'm looking at. Well, I'm going to explain to you guys today exactly how I evaluate players, why I value players the way I do, and how you can evaluate players yourself, as well as what the most important things are to avoid when you're evaluating players so you make sure that you're not messing up anything. So first, we're going to go down to the MLB players list and check out everybody in the league. This will give us an idea of what the league's overlay is. So we can have your pitching ratings, which are pretty useful in figuring out, okay, what's the stuff like in our league? What is movement like? And what's control like? Who has high things in each category? How many people have high ratings in each category? What are the highest ratings in each category? And if you're looking for somebody with a particularly high rating in some category, this is the way to do it. Next, we're going to go to batting. And we can check out here, contact, gap power, power, eye, avoid Ks. We can check out splits, figure out who's best versus each handedness. We can check out bunting if we want, speed, stealing, defense, or we can go down to the defense ratings to check out defense individually. So fielding ratings are down here. You can see who has the highest infield range, who's available, who do we want to be starting at shortstop, who has the highest arm, who has highest turn double plays, who's got a really great error, who's a really rangy outfielder, who has a high arm, who has a high error. You can check literally anything you want with these and sort by individual ratings to get a feel for your league and who you might be targeting in trades and such as well. You can also do this in free agency and sort to find the players that you're most interested in picking up. Now, when you're looking at evaluating players, the most common thing to do, and it's only natural, is to go straight to the overall rating. Well, he's got a really high overall rating, so he must be a great player. Well, this is not necessarily the case. For example, let's go to Yasmani Grandal. In general, I believe catchers are overrated by the system, but that's completely irrelevant. Now, I do think Grandal is actually a really outstanding catcher. He's got a great eye, which means he's going to be getting on base a lot, and he has really good catcher ability, which means that he's going to be extremely valuable defensively. However, his low avoid Ks rating means that he's going to be striking out a ton, which will also lower his ability to hit home runs and get base hits. The fact that he is hitting home runs is nice, but when you get down to his actual contact rating, if you subtract the avoid Ks and the home run power from the BABIP formula, you will see that he actually is not getting very many base hits at all. Overall, Grandal is definitely not a 5-star player and definitely not worth his I can't speak, his extremely large salary. And another thing, not all 5-star players are created equal. For example, Juan Soto, who absolutely demolishes the baseball in every way, is not the same 5-star caliber player as Freddie Freeman, who is nonetheless a good hitter, just not nearly on the caliber of Soto. The same goes for pitchers and such. And we can also go here and see Shane Bieber, who has outstanding control stuff. So he's not going to walk many guys. He's got a lot of stamina as well. He's going to pitch plenty of innings. He does not compare as well to, say, Max Scherzer, who is basically the same pitcher, just with higher stuff, lower movement and control. Ultimately, I would say Shane Bieber is probably the superior pitcher. And then you get guys like Max Muncy with ridiculously high ratings who aren't even good. Sure, he's going to draw a lot of walks, but he really cannot avoid strikeouts. He's going to be drawing a ton of strikeouts every season, which will limit his ability to do everything else after walking. Now, yeah, he's going to hit home runs, but he's also got a really low BABIP, which means that his total average is going to be pretty unimpressive as it goes. And that is what you are going to be using to evaluate players. Unless you have some sort of tool like a spreadsheet to evaluate players, which I, of course, create myself, which I will link in the description. And those are the most easy and good ways to value players. You need to be able to look at a player's individual ratings and determine how that's going to play out in your league. So, of course, understanding your league is hugely important to valuing players. Earlier, we were looking at players by their batting ratings and pitching ratings, and that was in part to figure out who's good at what. What do we have a lot of in this league? What do we not have so much of? And what we have a lot of on the pitching side, which I will start with here. Oops, that's not the right thing. is stuff. There are a ton of pitchers who can strike out batters for days. You can scroll down a long ways and still be in the blue stuff. You keep going, and there's a ton of green too. Lots of guys with really, really high strikeout abilities. And another thing you have to consider is that the standard for high stuff is even higher than it is historically because there are so many pitchers with really good pitches. Now you go to movement, you get a much different narrative. You can see all of the blue guys on one page very easily. They only take up half a page. You scroll down, and it doesn't take long to get out of the 65s. You would have been barely out of the blue by the point that you're out of the 65s from these movement guys. And then it barely goes much further on the 60s. So really, you're not looking at very many pitchers at all with very high movement. And you'll see most of these guys, or a good portion at least, are going to be pretty tough to use. Like Jesse Hahn here only has 40 controlled, 50 stuff. He's not really a viable MLB pitcher. You've got Paul Fry, who's got really low control as well. Carl Edwards Jr. is going to be held back pretty heavily by his control. And really, 55 movement isn't even going to be that impressive in terms of your home run prevention ability. On the control end, well, there are some pretty good control pitchers here. We see a lot of guys with high control. Again, you see a lot of players mixed in who are not going to be as used at the major league level, like Bruce Sutter and Craig Stammen. But you do have more control. It's more spread out. It's not quite on the caliber of stuff where you have it everywhere, but there are a lot of guys with high control. Now, what does that mean? Well, control is probably about average for historical values, but you have a lot of stuff and a lot of movement. Since pitchers are striking out more batters or batters at a higher rate, that means that your avoid Ks rating is going to be increased in value on the batter's end, as a single increase in avoid Ks will have a greater effect on your total ability to avoid strikeouts. Now, since pitchers have low movement, that means they're surrendering more home runs than they do historically. And what does that mean? Well, it means that having higher power will yield a higher return on home runs, so home run power is more valuable than it is in a neutral environment. Now let's go to the batting ratings and see exactly how batters are going to stack, or how pitchers are going to stack up against batters. We go to contact and nobody has 80. There were some 80 grade movement, I believe, pitchers, and definitely some 80 grade stuff. And there was even an 80 grade control guy, but there is not a single 80 grade contact hitter in the league. There are a handful of 75 grade contact guys, but you have to keep in mind that guys like Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, Cody Bellinger, and Christian Yelich are going to have a lot of that mixed in with the home run power as well. Definitely not their BABIP being on par this high. But there are some guys with some pretty high contact. As we go further down, we start to see this list thin out pretty quickly. This is pretty much what we saw with our movement, where there are just not very many guys with really high contact. And again, a good portion of them actually do get by mostly with their power dragging it up. So what does that mean for pitchers? Well, it means that you're going to see, actually avoid Ks is really more relevant. Contact is less direct here. So we still see the same trend where there are a couple guys with higher avoid Ks, but then you quickly see it drop off. What does that mean? Well, it means that it's going to be easier for pitchers to strike batters out since they are striking out when they would historically. So every increase in stuff is worth more than it would be in a neutral environment. Now we go over to I, and there are a good number of batters with a pretty high I. There are more guys with a higher I than there are with avoid Ks. It's not a huge number, but again, I think this is probably pretty average historically, so you will see pretty neutral results with your control. And then with power, we see a lot of guys with high power. There weren't too many guys in the blue, but there are a lot of guys in the green for sure. What does that mean? Well, it means that every increment with your increase in movement is going to have a greater effect on your ability to prevent home runs since guys are hitting more of them. And now contact is actually going to be measured up against defense here. So let's check to see if contact is high. And as we saw, it's not really that high. Well, what does that mean? It's actually going to decrease the value of defense. If contact is higher, that means there is a higher likelihood of a ball in play going for a hit, which would increase the value of defense, which suppresses the ability of balls in play to go for hits. But let's check the defense and see what's going to be valuable, or if it's going to affect your contact value at all. And once again, I clicked the wrong thing there. So with our infield range, we see only a handful of players at the MLB level who are actually really rangy. We go down, we see a couple of guys with 65s, but really it's just your shortstops, and that's pretty much the bare minimum to be a qualified, capable shortstop. And as we go further down, we see a lot of 60s, but by that point, it's still not going to be huge. So batting average is likely to be slightly inflated. I think these numbers are probably a little bit lower than your historical averages. Infield arm, lots of guys with good arms, actually. This might help to deflate batting averages a little bit, particularly on weakly hit ground balls to the left side of the infield. With turn double plays, we see a very low turn double plays in the league. Not a lot of guys who are going to turn a whole bunch. And overall, that is going to deflate your defense's ability to turn double plays, which will increase the value of balls in play very slightly. Infield error, actually pretty high. A lot of guys not committing too much error, but you have to keep in mind that it's even higher historically, so this is actually going to lead to an even greater increase in the on the importance of contact. Now, with outfield range, we actually do see a fair number of rangy outfield guys, and a good amount who can play left field just fine, or right field as well. I think this is probably about a little higher than historical average, honestly, because you don't see a whole bunch of rangy outfielders in the historical games. So that will slightly decrease batting average. Outfield arm, lots of guys with really strong arms, which I believe is probably better than historical average and going to slightly deflate your batting averages. And error is going to be below historical average because it's historically very high with the outfielders. So my personal opinion is that defense is going to be about average. It's going to have a normal effect on your offensive ability. Catcher arm will affect your stealing. I think this is probably about historical average, so it's not too valuable to steal, not too terrible to steal, but it's going to probably be a little higher than average and slightly deflate your values. Catcher ability can soften the effects of low control and increase the effects of high avoid Ks. Catcher ability in this era is not terribly high, really low in fact, which will increase the relative value of control and decrease the relative value of stuff. Now, of course, that's on a very staff by staff basis where depending on who your catcher is, that will increase the value. And I would, of course, recommend getting a high ability catcher wherever you can. Now, I basically already said that do not use overall ratings when you're evaluating players. Well, what else do you not really want to use? Gap power. Unless you have a hitter with really high contact ability, gap power is going to be very minimally effective as it is the very last thing in the OOTP game engine order of operations to go into effect. And it does not really play much of an outcome on your batter's performance anyway. For pitchers, hold runners seems to be relatively ineffective because as runners attempt to steal more, they will also get caught at a higher rate. Catcher arm is going to be much more important on your defense side when you're looking at preventing steals. And in this era, there are not a whole bunch of fast guys, so it's not super important either way. The only other thing I really need to say is make sure to take error into account. I went through and analyzed every position to see how it stacks up compared to the historical average, and you should do so as well in every save where you are looking to analyze players to get an idea for what's going to be important, what's going to be less important, and overall, what are you looking for in your players? I hope this video was helpful for you guys choosing and evaluating your players and getting a good idea for how effective they'll be. I'll see you guys on the next one.